to an exclusive interview with DG CRPF Kuldeep Singh. Interviewer is AIR correspondent Anand Chaturvedi.
Today we are joined by DG CRPF Kuldeep Singh, and Mr. Singh is heading the India's largest paramilitary forces at the present, which ensures internal security and safe and secure elections as well from time and again. On 3rd of this month, 22 of our brave paramilitary heroes lost their lives in an ambush by the left-wing extremists in Sukma district in Chhattisgarh. Now, Mr. Singh, with our deepest condolences to the families of the martyrs, kindly tell our listeners more about what exactly happened on 3rd April.
We had got an intelligence that there is a place called Junabeda. In Junabeda, there is a presence of large number of Naxals. Our forces sprung into action. Immediately they planned the operation, and on the night of 3rd and 4th, they rushed to the spot. As soon as they reached there, they searched the place but found nothing. In and around, they stayed there. 1.5 kilometer circle of the place where intelligence was to be there was searched, found nothing. After that, they planned their return. While returning from a different route at a place called Teklagudam, there was heavy ambush of Naxals. During ambush, they started indiscriminate fire upon the security forces. Security forces fought very bravely and inflicted very heavy casualties on them. Also, during the exchange of fire, our boys also got hit with that. They were using country-made mortars and so many other kinds of weapons which they had looted earlier from security forces. Those were used against the security forces. We also suffered some casualties. During that operation itself, when one Naxal was killed, our security forces retrieved the body of the Naxal also, along with the arms of one lady Naxal's body. And our boys, when they got hit, they were injured. Approximately DRG, STF, Cobra and Battalion all were there. Total 31 persons were injured. 22 later it was found that 22 Jawans got martyred. One is reportedly under their custody. So this was all about the operation. But our boys fought 4 hours with them, heavily armed Naxals, along with Jan militia and all. More than 750 Naxals had approached from all sides, because our operation was about 1.5 day long operation. So they could get some information that forces have gone there, and then they tried to surround. Casualties would have been much different had our Jawan not fought very bravely. The 2IC of 210 Cobra Battalion, Mr. Sandeep, was there. He planned it in such a good manner, as well as Mr. Manish, who is DC. He also planned in such a good manner that both of them took the mortal remains of 2 of our Jawans, dead body of 1 Naxal, and all 31 injured personnel, along all arms and arms of those personnel who got hit and were not to survive. And we were not in a position to bring the bodies also. They brought all those things together, kept on fighting with the Naxals, and bravely came back.
Mr. Singh, we have been repeatedly hearing in the media that there was some kind of failure of the intelligence or some operational failure. First of all, how do you respond to that? And then, was there a change in plan or strategy of the operation of the Maoists that you have been able to decipher? Was there some change in plan on their part?
As I told you in the answer of the first question itself, that there was an intelligence at Junabeda that Naxals have gathered. So we went for that intelligence to check and for search and destroy operation. That is called SADO. We went there, so we were operating on the intelligence. So it can't be said that there was intelligence failure. It was an intelligence on which the forces had planned an operation and went. So it was not failure at all. If you are trying to say, or if the people want to say that there was no intelligence in between when Naxals placed an ambush, so this is an ongoing operation. When the situation keeps on evolving, they keep on ditching us and we keep on ditching them. So number of times the ambush is laid by them, and number of times ambush and Naka and operational exchange of fire is done by us on them. So during this time, this was not at all operational failure, because I just narrated in the first question itself that they could fight for 4 hours pitched battle with the Naxals, and then they brought back all those injured personnel as well as the dead body of a Naxal they could bring back. So this can't be said to be an operational failure. This was an operational success.
Mr. Singh, listening from you directly would be a great thing. That how do you see the usage of drones in such kind of combat operations with the Naxals, especially when they're hiding deep inside the jungles? And was like drone system used in this combat per se?
We use drones, and in this drone was also used. But I can't elaborate you on the operational details, how drones capture images, how we use it and how we launch operations. That is operational details. I won't like to share it with you, but drones are used.
So one very basic question which the listeners would like to know, like when we know that the enemy of the state may be behind the borders or within the territory of the country, the government has to fight with them. But when we are fighting with the Naxals inside the country, we are, on one hand, we're saying that we are technologically advanced, we have drones, we have night vision technologies available with us. What is the challenge that is being faced by the state in order to fight these left-wing extremists? Can you narrate on that?
There are so many challenges on this, but we are countering that. You see, the challenges are the terrain, challenges are the communication links, challenges are there are no roads in the area that you can't bring all forces using your vehicles. Challenges are that they use the explosives and IEDs on the roads, so vehicles are blown. Or challenges are the spikes which they use for the purpose of going there. Then there are geographical challenges like during the heat, summer, and then during the monsoon time there is overflowing nalas and rivers and all those kinds. These are all challenges. But government has been very, very liberal in granting us all kinds of equipment by which we basically come up with to cover all these kind of problems. And then we plan accordingly and go for the operations.
How difficult do you think, Mr. Singh, it is to fight out the enemies in such kind of guerrilla warfare?
No, it's not difficult, but it's a challenge. Nothing is difficult. We are prepared for that. Our Cobra is prepared for that. It is for counter-insurgency operations. We train them accordingly. Whatever cases happen, we study, we prepare the case study, and after case study, we prepare ourselves accordingly. So we take the challenges and go for the operations. So during training, we never consider these things to be difficulties. These are additional challenges in particular area. Maybe the challenges in Kashmir are different. The challenges in Chhattisgarh are different. Challenges in West Bengal elections are different. Challenges in natural calamities are different. So these are not difficulties. These are definitely challenges. And those challenges we take into account while planning our operations and do the job.
So one more thing, that the current government has tackled this menace of left-wing extremism with an iron fist, definitely. And how do you see the change in our combat approach against them from previous years?
There is a big change, and that's ongoing also, in the sense that number of forces have been deployed more. The 5 battalions have been pressed into action just a few months back. The necessary infrastructure is being built. Number of camps are being opened inside their core area now. Then we are giving the Jawans various kind of accoutrements, various kinds of force multiplier equipment, and so many other things by which the Jawans and the officers and men are able to carry out their assigned operation in a better manner. More than that, elaborating more than that won't be proper on a media basis, because what are the specifications of those things which we are doing won't be good on the media.
So recently you said that there have been some reinforcements or more position of battalions that have been placed there in that area. So do you think that has irked the Naxals more so that they came back like with such an ambush?
They are anti-socials. They have to leave that and come to the mainstream. If they keep on doing anti-social activities, no state is going to tolerate it. So whether they like it or not, it is not, government's action is not as per their liking and disliking. Government's action is against ultras. If you are not conforming to the constitution of the country, then you have to be taken to task. As simple as that. Forces are made for that. So that kind of operation is being done.
So there was a leak from the villagers there who live in the vicinity about such a heavy movement of the forces in that area?
No. It's not always that there is a leak. But you see, when large operations are planned, number of times, somehow or the other, some villagers seeing from far or something, maybe that they put their people who see whether forces are coming out of camps, and they go and tell that. We prepare for that also. That even if they come to know how will we tackle. You see, we try to go out of the camp unnoticed. But we prepare for that also, that if they come to know, what will be our approach to tackle them.
So there were reports in the media that two of the villages which were in the vicinity of that area were totally empty. There were no people in those two villages. There was a report in the media saying that. So when the forces moved through that area, did they not find something suspicious there too?
No, we do not move through villages. We avoid villages generally, and we try to hit our target area. Avoiding villages is a purposeful act so that our location and our movement of direction is not actually open and people don't come to know. So if they don't come to know, a lot of people, maybe they're appointed by Naxals, who the villagers will go and report to them in a faster manner. So we avoid villages when we go from there. So we don't go into the villages. And villages were empty. While coming back also, we were not coming through the villages. So if nearby villages were empty, it was not our job to know whether anybody is there in the village or not. Later it was found out that yes, there was nobody in the village. Or the report came to you, or report came in social media that there were nobody in villages. Maybe that they used the homes of the villages as shield and opened fire from them. Maybe that was their plan to launch operation or lay an ambush nearby a village.
Sir, Honorable Home Minister said that the country will fight the menace with added vigor and that the sacrifice of our Jawans will not go in vain. He said the nation will take this fight to the end and will eliminate the left-wing extremism in next 1 year. What do you have to say on that?
That's the direction from the government. We will carry it out.
So the Women's Battalion has been recently added in the premier paramilitary forces. How do you see these progressive changes over the years? What do you have to say?
That should always be there. 50% of the population is male and almost 50% is the female. You know it very well. So amalgamation of the better half, 50% in every aspect of life will definitely make a change to tackle any situation, not only the forces. Everywhere and anywhere, they are all welcome, definitely up to their share of population which they are.
Just so speaking of the another part which the CRPF also plays a very vital role in ensuring a safe and peaceful elections in the country. So recently the 4 states and 1 union territory just underwent elections, and some of are still going through the elections. There are some complaints about some minor events by some political parties. What do you have to say on that, sir?
You see, the forces carry on their assigned task, job or mandate of the constitution or government, So we carry out our job. For the political parties, as per their understanding, making statements. I have no comments on political parties' statement on performance of the forces.
So one last question, sir. You met the wounded Jawans there in the area. How's their morale at the moment?
Very high.
Yeah.
Their morale is very high. They just want to
Josh.
They just want to go back immediately and fight again. They are not in the battlefield. They are not liking. They don't want to remain in a hospital bed. They're raring to go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for speaking to AIR.
Discussion on ensuring free and fair assembly elections. The participants are Akshay Raut, former Director General of Election Commission of India, and Ashwini Srivastav, journalist.
Elections are going on in West Bengal. Elections are scheduled to be held in 8 phases. Of these, 4 have already happened, and elections to 4 crucial phases are yet to happen. In this scenario, authorities face one difficult task, that is of ensuring free and fair election. Raut sir, what are some of the challenges that administration faces in ensuring free and fair conduct of assembly polls? The question is especially reference to West Bengal and in general also.
I am sure you have in mind the ongoing 5 assembly elections, and particularly the 8-phase election in West Bengal, which has gone into quite a bit of difficulty in terms of management and in terms of the future of democratic process in the country as well. From the time the election started in 1951 till today, we just had Bihar elections some months back, and we have very different type of election in each of the 5 places where elections are being held now. In 4, Assam, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, the polling process is over. Right. But in West Bengal it is on. Everywhere the management challenge is very different. It was different in earlier elections. It was different in the national election 2019. And this time also it's very different. To give you a quick example, perhaps the political combativeness which results in certain amount of avoidable violence and sometimes very harsh physical violence, definitely a lot of verbal violence, which is happening in West Bengal, is typical. The West Bengal election always had a bit of a violent past, but this time it's also playing out even worse. In Tamil Nadu, where the polling has just been over, of course the counting is in all the places on 2nd of May, the money power was the problem. Then we had the issues of identity and ethnic issues, stripes in parts of the state or sometime in the whole state. Even in earlier elections, sometime we have left-wing extremism as a problem. Sometime we have cyclone and storm and natural disasters as a problem. And this time for last about 1 year and plus, the Kovid pandemic has been an overarching problem. So these problems are different, but the Election Commission of India, which is rated as one of the best in the world of its type, keeps trying to innovate itself and to come out with interventions which will suit a particular general election or even by-election. That's what is happening. But it is a bit disappointing the way matters have gone in the state of West Bengal at least. You see, we have something which is a Bible for the election practices in India at least, a very unique document called Model Code of Conduct. Please allow me to quote a little bit. No party or candidate shall include in any activity which may aggravate existing differences or create mutual hatred or cause tension between different castes and communities, religious or linguistic. Even there is a conclusive line, there shall be no appeal to caste or communal feelings for securing votes. But look at the elections as they have happened, the campaign over the last several weeks and now even more. We have all types of direct or indirect sectarian appeals, reference to religious institutions, symbolism, sentiments, and in fact it raising the temperature unnecessarily many times, the Model Code of Conduct coming under stress, the Election Commission of India as a management body trying to look left, look right, look up and down and trying to its level best to secure what is called a level playing ground and not allow things to go out of hand. We had the unfortunate situation in Kuch Bihar in the phase 4 polling yesterday, in which we had certain deaths, loss of life. So things should not be allowed to go to that level. That is not the sense of Indian democracy.
Who should be blamed for this sort of lawlessness or mismanagement in ensuring free and fair election? Is it the political parties alone or their members, activists, or somewhere you see that people are also at the fault who may be unaware of certain guidelines that might be existing? Who need to be blamed?
It's a combined, it's a stakeholding in democracy, and every stakeholder doing its own bit, their own responsibility well. That makes us strong as a democracy. Election Commission of India, despite the huge powers it has been given under the Constitution, under the Article 324 for the superintendent's control and direction of elections, cannot do it all by itself. The political parties are high stakeholders in power. They are in ruling the state, ruling the federal structure, ruling at many other levels, and they're very powerful stakeholders. It is their own responsibility, own responsible conduct that will decide the future of democracy.
I just wanted to do a quick intervention. Do they somewhere lack in fulfilling their own responsibility?
Definitely, it looks like that at least. They're all mature and large political parties with huge membership. Some are age-old, some even come before the independence of India. And they have given to India so many top leaders. They have ideologies, they have manifestos which speak about all good things. But when it comes to campaigning, suddenly the temperature, the aggressiveness increases so much. And lot of direct flouting and sometimes in subterfuge, the flouting of the norms. I think a lot of responsibility comes squarely on the political parties to conduct themselves in an appropriate manner so that people are not agitated.
I would like to know, when people and political parties know that there exist guidelines which need to be abided by them, why there is certain lackadaisical approach on their part, and why can't administration act swiftly and sternly against this flouting of norms by them? Why can't we still act against them? Let there be a stiff punishment so that these activities stop.
There is a big debate also, Nidhi, about how far to go. Just yesterday, if you have seen that after what happened in Kuch Bihar, Election Commission of India has come out with very strong sort of action, which includes extending of the silent period from 48 hours to 72 hours, also banning any political leader to go to that place, which is very important, which we are not discussing yet in this discussion. is the flouting of the COVID-19 protocol by political activists, participants. And all of us know what situation we are in terms of COVID pandemic. The Election Commission of India has come out with a very strong type of note to the political parties to make sure that in the remaining phases of West Bengal election, at least, a strong adherence to COVID protocol.
Raut sir, why not some action to deter them, to ensure that COVID-19 protocols are strictly followed?
See, in Bihar, the Election Commission's endorsement, the Election Commission's guidelines for COVID was created after national, international, regional consultations. And lot of absolutely well thought out administrative measures were put in place in consultation with the health and disaster management authorities. And it worked very nicely in those very difficult time call us, and it worked out very well. Commission came out as what is called Bihar model of elections to COVID-19. And now suddenly we have a surge. The guidelines, let me tell you, the guidelines were reinforced this time. And all the action which is taken to any super spread was taken by the commission. Let us confine ourselves. So in the polling station, in the polling process, in logistics, nothing has gone wrong today. What has gone is the action and behavior of the political activists and political parties and political rallies and processions, only in the campaign side. So the campaign side, we have a model code of conduct, which is a voluntary code unique to India, in which the willing adherence has been given by political parties themselves. It is not a rule book. It's not a book of statute, but it has worked because every political party says, okay, it's a document which we are going to follow. And now COVID guidelines have also been added as a sequence to that for this COVID period. And finally, all said and done, political parties, Ashwiniji, are not school kids. I mean, very mature. I mean, they're running the state. They're running the government in many places in their own ways. We expect some responsibility. It's not that Election Commission is not acting or cannot act. But there is something called a Lakshman Rekha. And it's a delicate balance about up to which Election Commission should push and up to what political parties should themselves voluntarily follow a code. But if it comes to that, I have seen Election Commission also acting very strong. And I'll not be surprised, like yesterday, in the coming phases, if Election Commission again does few things which are very strict. And at some point of time, the person who is at the receiving end of the action, a political party or a leader, they cry foul. Actually, anyone who is taken to task by the exercise of the rule and judgment by the Election Commission of India, they start crying foul. Here's an example of media. You represent media, and media is supposed to be self-regulated. Right. Media, very rightly, under freedom of expression, it is expected that there will not be any type of state control or regulation on them. They will self-regulate, behave responsibly themselves. That's great. I think something similar applies to political parties. Though there is a model code, there is the Election Commission of India which can do anything for fair conduct of the elections. But actually, in practice, political parties only. And I think in the coming years, I think the owners, after the West Bengal experience again, I would expect that there would be a tighter regulation, and political parties will be expected to follow the rule book more and more.
Right. One of the main problems which most of the administration face in ensuring free and fair election is the false narrative or the fake news that is spread through social media or other platforms these days. Do you feel that there is also a need to regulate these platforms, though guidelines exist? I am aware of the Election Commission of India's guidelines, which they root through. PCI has issued these guidelines and Election Commission of India emphasizes on it. Do you feel that somewhere social media or the fake news on social media need to be checked strictly?
That has come as a problem about 10 years back when I was a little more actively associated with the Election Commission of India. We had an issue, you would recall that time, we had an issue called paid news, right? And it was more reflected in the print media and to a good extent on television. But at that time, the social media had not come out with that on the electoral field. But then, digital media has become a problem in protecting the level playing field in elections. But as you can see, in the present series of 5 elections, that has not come out as one of the major problems. It has been reasonably well handled in terms of their coming and giving their own, surrendering some of their own sovereignty, if you call it, and subjecting themselves to Election Commission's Code of Conduct, declared all digital media groups that they will behave in such a manner during the election period. And in the meantime, we all have seen that overall, at the government level and national level, there is an uprising to cases of bad behavior on social media or difficulties which come out of the independence or recklessness of social media. So that is already being regulated by certain rules which have come up in between. And Election Commission will, I think, in the future days, will also take advantage. Very good news is that is a difficulty which is reasonably handled by this time. I would like to recall one very important, just one sentence of the first President of Indian Republic, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Just before the 1951-52, the first election, and if I recall correctly, then on the eve of the Independence Day in 51, President Dr. Rajendra Prasad just told the Indian electorate, which was going to vote for the first time, you have the power of gods, and I quote, you have the power of gods, and let me hope you would use it like God. What a powerful statement when India, compared to any other country, in lock, stock, barrel in one go handed over universal suffrage to its population, most of whom were poor and illiterate. But at that time, the president of the newborn republic said that this is a power of God and you should exercise it like God. So, come whatever comes on social media, come whatever comes in all this type of rambling of very negative speeches and call for action by political leaders. They are desperate if there is some desperation of combativeness. So these are all. But the voter should remember that he has the power of God and he should exercise by applying what? Just now we discussed the voters' pledge. So keeping the voters' pledge in mind, the pledge, and he should exercise the power like a God by fearlessly and without being influenced by considerations of religion, race, caste, community, language, or an inducement.
Thank you so much for talking to us, Raut sir, and we hope that political parties, people, and every stakeholder remember Lakshman Rekha that you have pointed out in our discussion and follow to all the guidelines, especially the COVID-19 protocols while campaigning in poll-bound states, not only now, but in future election too. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
On Prime Minister's message from Raisina Dialogue to the World, the participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
The Prime Minister reached out to the world community as he also talked about India's role, and he also specifically said that India has walked the talk on helping the world countries in the coronavirus pandemic despite its limited resources. The PM also went on to say that India today understands that mankind will not defeat the pandemic unless all of us, regardless of the color of our passports, come together. Ambassador Sajjanhar, when we see the Prime Minister's outreach to the world community and to the world leaders, and also explaining the initiatives that India has taken, how do you look at this message that he has put out to the world community, in a way partly explaining India's role and also explaining how India has played its part and, as the PM said, walked the talk?
I think the Prime Minister, what he really sought to do through the keynote address at the Raisina Dialogue was basically to suggest that what the world has been doing for the last 70 years is not being the correct approach. Because the approach soon after the end of the Second World War was to build institutions so that there would not be a Third World War. And he said that approach had been wrong because I think he raised some very fundamental questions. And he said that the approach should have been as to how can the problems of the world in terms of poverty, in terms of inequity, in terms of climate change, and the other challenges that afflict the world, how can those be resolved? And in that context, he said that the world has failed to come together to deal with this and what the world needs to do now. And I think his address was both thought-provoking, it was incisive, as also it was extremely inspirational and motivating, because he said that although there is this challenge of the pandemic, but this challenge can be converted into an opportunity by embarking on a human-centric approach. And this is what he said, like when he mentioned that when you have some plan. The first option might be a plan A, the second might be a plan B. But as far as the Earth is concerned, there is no planet B, there's only planet Earth. So we have to save the planet Earth by coming together. And his approach was that of multilateralism, that is, of all countries coming together and trying to bring the world together for the benefit of each and every one. So I think basically he was mentioning that multilateralism has been a failure so far, and these fissures and these fractures have become very evident, and the only way to deal with this is that the whole world should come together, as India has done. The role that India has played in terms of reaching out to the world, notwithstanding its rather limited resources, but it has tried to do that, and much more needs to be done, and India is ready in following this human-centric approach.
Mr. Sajjanhar, as you pointed out, the PM very specifically also said that the world was underprepared for the COVID-19 pandemic. He pointed out to the post-Second World War order, and in which we had the United Nations and other multilateral structures that he had said had been created only to prevent the Third World War. And the Prime Minister said that we should have instead focused on hunger, poverty, and humanitarian issues. How relevant do you think this is, and how much does this cut across to the global community? Because we do see that while we have the pandemic, for example, we do have a lot of issues, a lot of politicking still going on. So when the Prime Minister has correctly pointed out that maybe our emphasis needs to be hunger, poverty, and humanitarian issues, how much do you think the message actually reaches across, and the world leaders are willing to step aside their political differences and come together and give a united response to the pandemic?
I think the Prime Minister raised some very basic and very fundamental questions. And if the world does not heed it, it will be at its own peril that the world will not be paying adequate attention to it. You are very right when you say that the Prime Minister mentioned that the focus had been just on avoiding the Third World War, and that in an age of competition, the spirit of cooperation has been forgotten. So whatever we need to do going forward, it can be achieved only through having a cooperative approach. And also that the concern for the welfare of humanity has been left behind. These are important aspects which the world needs to weave into its approach as we move forward, if we are to deal not only with the pandemic of today. As he said, it was the institutions that were created after the Second World War were not to fight the wars that will come ahead, but they were to fight the wars that had already gone by. So the challenges that are coming, as the Prime Minister had said, were of hunger, he mentioned inequity, he mentioned injustice, he mentioned terrorism. And I think these are the issues, also climate change, that we will need to deal with by the whole world coming together. If every country wants to handle these issues as they have been doing so far, I don't think they will be able to meet with success. You mentioned about Europe. You look around anywhere in the world, what we speak about vaccine nationalism, that although the countries are small, if they are developed countries, they are hoarding vaccines. They are not allowing vaccines to be shipped out. While a country like India, even before the vaccine came onto the scene, India had gone out to more than 150 countries, and it had supplied the PPEs, it had supplied medicines, other equipment like ventilators, like masks, and within its limited resources, it had shared its experience, it had shared its expertise, and also the resources with the rest of the world. And even now, as far as the vaccines are concerned, although we have a huge task in front of us to vaccinate all our people, but still India has reached out soon after the vaccination was kicked off in the country by supplying now to more than 80 countries the vaccines that have been manufactured in India. So I think he set this out as an example that no one is safe unless everyone is safe, particularly as far as the pandemic is concerned.
Ambassador Sajjan, we have seen that since January 21st, the government has allowed the supply of 6.51 crore doses of the two India-made vaccines, of which more than 1 crore are donations or grants from India to 90 countries worldwide. And we followed the news of the vaccine Maitri, how India has helped out smaller nations while we are also vaccinating people here in our own country. How do you think that this becomes an example by which India leads the world? For example, showing that while there are priorities at home, India is also doing its bit globally, and this also puts India somewhere in a global leadership role, that while India is of course fulfilling its own domestic priorities, we have also made it a point to reach out to the world in general.
That sense has really emerged as a role model as far as the world is concerned on this issue of the vaccines. Because if you look at the responses of most of the world leaders who received these vaccines, for instance, when the vaccines were received by Bhutan, the Prime Minister of Bhutan said that it is truly commendable that when India is required to vaccinate such huge numbers within its own country, that it has the generosity and the large heart to share its resources with other countries. There are, of course, accounts of the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro welcoming the vaccines from India and calling it the Sanjeevani being brought by Hanuman to cure the people of Brazil. There is also the instance of the President of Dominican Republic, Roosevelt Skerrit, who said, I have read in Bible that when you pray, your prayers are always answered. But I never realized that my prayer for vaccines would be answered so very quickly, so very promptly. So I think the world over, whether it is the UN Secretary General, whether it is Director General of the WHO, all of them have spoken extremely highly and applauded the actions of the Indian government in reaching out and particularly to providing these vaccines to the developing countries of the world under the WHO's COVAX program, and also within our neighborhood. In fact, the first vaccines that went out of India were to Bhutan and Maldives on the 20th of January. We started our own vaccination drive on the 16th. Within 4 days, they went to these two countries. Then on the 21st, we supplied 2 million doses to Bangladesh, 1.5 million doses to Nepal, and so on and so forth. So I think whether it is our neighborhood or developing countries, that has been our priority, because otherwise, if India had not gone out to them, many of them would have really been left behind.
Ambassador Sajjan, as the PM said, that mankind will not defeat the pandemic unless all of us, regardless of the color of our passports, come out of it. Do you think that this is a good enough argument to then counter the critique that one is also getting to hear, that maybe India was sending out more? Because this is, at the end of the day, a very global problem. So one cannot be safe unless your neighbor is safe. So tying in the diplomatic fact and also the humanitarian fact, do you feel that the Prime Minister has said yesterday and the vaccine Maitri is actually a diplomatic win-win for India?
You would recall that when the Prime Minister in his keynote address at the Raisina Dialogue, he said that the world has to follow a human-centric approach. So if India itself does not follow, then the words do not carry much credibility. And this is what the Prime Minister said, that you have to walk the talk. You would also recall that in September last year, when the Prime Minister was addressing the UN General Assembly, he had said that India is the pharmacy of the world, India is the vaccine center of the world, and whatever capacity India has to manufacture vaccines, it will be utilized not only for its own population, but it will be utilized to help the whole of humanity and the whole of mankind. And this is the message that had been sent out, whether when our Foreign Secretary traveled to Bangladesh or when our senior leaders traveled to Nepal or to Sri Lanka, that as soon as India gets the vaccine, then supply of vaccine to our neighbors will also be a matter of priority. And India has truly done what promised to do, what it had committed to do. And I think this would have raised the persona and the profile and the image of India amongst the people and amongst the countries of the world in a very significant manner.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, we saw that the Prime Minister spoke at the Raisina Dialogue. It's a 4-day conference where the Rwandan President, the Danish Prime Minister, the Australian Prime Minister, and the President of the European Council have also been attending. And the Prime Minister also said that this is a watershed moment in human history. When we look at this statement, is it also somewhere reminding the world that maybe this is now a wake-up call for humanity and for all of us basically as how to deal with future pandemics and about our responses? And more importantly, when the PM says this, it is also pointing out to our own responses and how India has led by example and not just by dialogues, but we've actually shown how to deal with the pandemic.
Two aspects that he referred to, Simran. One was that this sort of a pandemic comes once in a century. The last time that the world had to contend with this, confront a pandemic of this nature, it was in 1918, so exactly 100 years ago. And secondly, what are the institutions that were created after the Second World War that they have been found quite inadequate to deal with the challenge that the world is confronting today. So if the failures have been so visible and so evident, what is it that the world needs to do? And in that he said that the world needs to come together. In fact, what I found inspirational as far as the Prime Minister's keynote address is concerned, that he acknowledged that it is a challenge. But what he said was that it can be created, it can be converted into an opportunity. And in that context, he gave the example of India, how India has been able to deal with it. And also, I think this was a message to the whole world that if we do not cooperate, if we do not collaborate, if we do not work together, if we do not follow a human-centric approach, then it will be at the peril of the world and its system. We have to change the institutions appropriately so that human being comes at the center of those and not economics and profit making as has been done so far.
And Ambassador Sajjanhar, we bring today's talk to an end with a reminder of what the PM has said to the world, and he has reached out and reminded everyone that regardless of the color of our passports, humanity and mankind will not defeat the pandemic unless all of us come together. Thank you.
Thank you.
New program on special briefing by Foreign Secretary on international cooperation on COVID pandemic.
As India battles a second wave of coronavirus pandemic, countries around the world have come forward to provide assistance to fulfill the requirements of several medical equipments and medicines in the country. Briefing the media in New Delhi today on international cooperation on COVID pandemic, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said the situation in the country is unprecedented. He said over 40 countries have come forward to offer help in the fight against the second wave of the pandemic at the special media briefing.
We have actually received offers of assistance from various governments. There has been quite an outpouring of, I would say, solidarity with India. There's been outpouring of, let's say, assistance from various countries. Over 40 countries have actually committed to provide us with many of the items that we need most urgently. Our objective is to ensure that we channelize all of this assistance that is both sought by us and being received in a manner that is as effective as possible. In other words, how do we receive it? How do we ensure that we facilitate quick clearance, and not only that, we ensure that all of this is taken to different parts of the country where it is needed, most critical areas. In that context, of course, we have had very strong interministerial and interagency cooperation. Cabinet Secretary has been overseeing this process himself. We've also had the representatives of a number of other ministries, obviously the Health Ministry, Pharmaceuticals, Home Ministry, Civil Aviation, Ministry of Defense, Biotechnology, a range of ministries, agencies, finance, I shouldn't forget, have been involved in this effort. What we want to make sure is that all this equipment that is consigned to India, to the Government of India, is expeditiously cleared. There are blanket exemptions from the different taxes, customs duties and taxes that they would have to normally undergo if such items were coming into India, how they can be quickly cleared. But also, most important is logistically, when we are talking about heavy equipment, oxygen generating plants, how these are taken to different parts, as I said, of the country where it's most needed. And this is something that has been quite a major effort. I mean, we want to make sure that this process is smooth right from the point that we identify sources of supply to the point that it actually reaches those of our citizens that need these items and this sort of assistance the most.
He said that India has helped many of these countries in their hour of need, and now they are returning the favor.
It is an unprecedented situation. We are dealing with a situation that is quite exceptional. We have certainly prioritize the items that we need. We are sourcing many of these items from many countries. But many countries have come forward on their own to offer assistance. And you've seen that in many countries, I think the fact that we have been responsive to their needs when they had the requirement. Keep in mind that the United States, much of Europe, many other countries have had a second, even third wave. So in a certain sense, when we supplied essential pharmaceutical products, whether it is hydroxychloroquine, whether it is paracetamol, or even remdesivir at that time, or we supplied vaccines under our Vaccine Maitri program, there was appreciation that we came to the assistance of other countries in pursuit of what our Prime Minister calls working for the common good, or in our concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Today, those countries, if you see what President Biden said, what the United States said, what many Gulf countries have said, many of our other partners have said, we appreciated your assistance. We are today giving you assistance in return. We have given assistance, we are getting assistance. It shows an interdependent world. It shows a world that is working with each other. And I must say here, we have been in the forefront of generating that consciousness that the COVID-19 pandemic is not one that countries should be looking out for themselves only. Very early in the game, Prime Minister has talked about the fact that countries need to come together to cooperate. That is why he initiated the SAARC conference on COVID-19 in March, when this was a very new concept. He then initiated the call for a G20 summit, an extraordinary summit. The G20 has always met for financial or economic reasons, never met for humanitarian circumstances. And we have extensively, I think, even sometimes gone forward to assist countries where they were very far away, they were not normally within our ambit. We saw so many Caribbean countries, Latin American countries, African countries. And today, these countries are coming forward and saying, what can we do? Mauritius offered us assistance. Bhutan has offered us, they said, we have 2 oxygen plants. Please use them for your requirements in Assam and West Bengal. Bangladesh is saying that we produce remdesivir. Please take some of our remdesivir. Why are these countries saying it? They're saying it because they feel that this is the time where we must help. India has helped us, we must help it. So I don't think we are looking at it in policy terms. We are looking at it in terms of a situation that is very, very unusual, that is very unprecedented, that is very exceptional, and we will do whatever it takes to meet the requirements of our people at this point of time.
Foreign Secretary said consignments carrying medical equipment and medicines have started to arrive in India from various countries. He said the US has pledged to help the country in its fight against the pandemic. Mr. Shringla informed that 3 flights are scheduled to arrive from the United States within a week.
We've got already a number of items that have come in. For example, the first flight that came in was the night of 27th April from the UK, which brought in a number of oxygen concentrators, ventilators, and other equipment. Last night we had a flight from Russia, actually 2 special aircraft that came in from Russia that brought very large number of oxygen generating equipment. That means plants that generate oxygen. We have some 20 of those plants. We also had a lot of ventilators, bedside monitors. Russia also gave us favipiravir, which is in some senses, again, antiviral for COVID-19 treatment. We are also expecting tomorrow and over the next couple of days, 3 special flights from the United States. You would have seen that President Biden spoke to Prime Minister. He offered extensive assistance. You would have seen the details of that assistance also from the United States. And of course, that assistance also went into areas like raw materials for our vaccine industry, etc. But the US is going to provide, at an initial basis, at least 3 of these aircraft coming in with much needed oxygen equipment and concentrators, other areas that we need assistance. I talked about the 3 flights that are coming in. The first one, which is tomorrow. 2 flights tomorrow, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And on the 3rd of May, we will have a 3rd flight. They will carry with them very large number of oxygen generating equipment. There will also be 2,000 oxygen concentrators, 500 oxygen cylinders, and I would say that capacity to provide 28 million liters of oxygen. Again, very much needed help, both in terms of cylinders, in terms of actual oxygen, but also, most importantly, oxygen generating equipment that is very much needed.
Foreign Secretary underlined the priority areas that include liquid oxygen and any equipment that produces oxygen, oxygen generators, concentrators, cryogenic tankers, transportation equipment for oxygen. He said India is looking at getting around 550 oxygen generating plants, 4,000 oxygen concentrators and 10,000 oxygen cylinders from abroad to deal with the coronavirus pandemic.
If you want an overall sense of what is coming in terms of oxygen generating plants, we are talking about over 500 plants. In fact, we are talking about close to 550 oxygen generating plants that are going to come in from different sources from all over the world. As I said, it is those that we are purchasing, it is those that are being provided by corporates, by governments, by private individuals, by community associations. It's a mix of all that, but we are looking at over 500 oxygen generating plants coming in the next few days and weeks. We are looking at over 4,000 oxygen concentrators. These are very, very essential for what we're doing now. We are looking at over 10,000 oxygen cylinders, which are also in some senses in short supply. 17 oxygen cryogenic tankers, some of which have already come in. You've seen the Air Force has flown in some of these tankers from Thailand, Singapore, etc.
Mr. Shringla said that there is an urgent need for pharmaceutical products like remdesivir and tocilizumab. He also informed that the several global drug manufacturing companies have assured to provide medicines like remdesivir, tocilizumab and favipiravir. He further added that India is looking at procuring 400,000 units of remdesivir medicine from Egypt, besides exploring to get it from countries like the United Arab Emirates, Bangladesh and Uzbekistan.
Gilead Sciences has offered us 450,000 doses of remdesivir, very, very essential in today's context. We also have been offered 300,000 doses of favipiravir, some from Russia, but also from the UAE and other countries. Tocilizumab is very essential again, very part of our priority list, and we are going to get tocilizumab from Germany, from Switzerland. Roche has also agreed to expedite their raw material supplies for the production of some of our very essential drugs, and so has Gilead Sciences. So we are also expediting raw material supplies, not only for the production of remdesivir, but also in terms of vaccines. What I want to say is that all in all, this is very vital part of our, the international cooperation is a vital part of our, meeting and bridging the immediate requirements that we have. Obviously, we are making every effort to step up our own capacities. For example, my colleague Secretary Pharmaceuticals told me that we normally manufacture 67,000 doses of remdesivir a day. Our 7 manufacturers of remdesivir that are authorized manufacturers by Gilead Sciences, but the requirement today might be between 2 to 3 lakhs a day. So we have to bridge the gap. This is something that our producers are well aware of. They are actually ramping up their production. We've had a meeting which our minister himself took, which the cabinet secretary also took, with all producers, and we find that they are ready to go from 67,000 to 3 lakhs, even 4 lakhs a day. They need the raw material inputs, they need the support, and that is something that is coming in the fullest possible way. We've got all assurances from Gilead, from the US government, that whatever requirements are there, we will try and meet it to the best of ability. We are also in touch with other manufacturers of remdesivir in Egypt, in other parts of the world, to see whether we can source this from those countries, and we are working on making sure that those gaps are met. So what we are talking about is short-term gaps. We're not even talking about the medium term. I think by the medium term, our own domestic industry would have been up to the task. You have seen that when we had the first wave, there was a shortage of masks, PPEs, ventilators. In a short while, we went from being net importers to net exporters. Test kits, for example, today we are producing enough test kits for ourselves and different parts of the world. I would say that the same thing will be seen in terms of production of remdesivir, in terms of production of some of the oxygen generating equipment. If you see in oxygen terms also, from our health authorities have made a very detailed presentation where it's very clear that our capacities have been ramped up even in the first few days of the second wave. And we have also diverted oxygen that normally goes to industrial units for medical uses. But there are logistical challenges. Much of the oxygen produced is in the eastern part of the country, whereas demand is primarily in the western and northern parts of our country. So we have to match the supply source with the demand source. We need equipment, transportation equipment to do it, and therefore cryogenic tankers and Indian Air Force has come in terms of making sure that there is enough capacity to do that. All of our missions and all of our ambassadors have been very receptive, extremely adept in meeting the requirements of the day. We've established contact directly with Gilead, with Roche, with all of the companies that are involved. We're working with governments, we're working with the private sector, we're working with associations, we're working with chambers of commerce. We are giving the topmost priority to meeting our requirements, our immediate requirements in terms of our healthcare facilities in combating the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at it in the next few days, if you look at the sort of capacities that we'll be creating, we'll be doing a very important role of bridging, by which time domestic capacities would have come into place. In the ministry itself, as I said, we have different teams working on different parts of it. We are very clear that this is the highest priority, and we will work extensively to make sure that the entire cooperation and coordination that we need with all of our partners, international partners, interlocutors all over the world will be smoothly interfaced with our domestic requirements and our domestic ministries and agencies that actually deal with this on the ground.
On the travel restrictions imposed by several countries in the wake of surge in COVID cases, Foreign Secretary said the measures were temporary. He added the cargo connectivity would remain unaffected.
In terms of movement of people, any restrictions that are placed are temporary in nature. After all, when UK had an issue, then there was a temporary ban from our side. When there was an issue involving Europe, there was a temporary ban. When we had issues from Southeast Asia, we had put a ban. But they were temporary in nature. Similarly, we believe that many of these restrictions that you're talking about today, and we are in touch with all our interlocutors, they've all said, look, this is what we are doing, but this is only dependent on as long as the situation is there. This is not even a medium-term thing. These are short-term measures. The second thing is that with most countries, we've ensured that at least we are open in terms of cargo connectivity. Air connectivity is there, whether it is the Gulf, whether it is Europe, whether it is America, whether it is Southeast Asia or China. The air connectivity should be open. Cargo should travel, and the essential supply chains that are involved should not be disrupted.
When he responded to the questions on whether there was a shift in India's policy of not accepting foreign aid, Mr. Shringla said India is not looking at medical supplies and assistance by its partners and friends in terms of any policy framework. Foreign Secretary said the assistance we have given earlier and the assistance we are getting now shows an interdependent world. He said it shows a world that is working with each other.
You were listening to a discussion on international support for India in the fight against COVID-19. The participants are Ashok Sajjanar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the international cooperation which India has received in the wake of the second coronavirus pandemic which has swept India. The Foreign Secretary, Mr. Harsh Shringla, also briefed the media yesterday, and he pointed out that over 40 countries have reached out to India to help India meet its many emergency requirements. Ambassador Sajjanar, when we see this international pouring and we see this cooperation happening globally, how do you assess the situation, and also is this then a reflection of the goodwill that India has built for itself globally?
Yes, you're right, Simran, because when Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, he says that it's 40 countries that have voluntarily and spontaneously come out to support and help India in this time of an unprecedented crisis and catastrophe. That definitely signifies outpouring of goodwill, because it is not only countries that have strategic partnership with India, not only United States, Russia, Singapore, Australia, Japan, and all the others. But there are countries which are maybe not so developed countries, not so rich, not so powerful, not so prosperous, but all of them have come out and they have offered their help. So across the board, the countries have come and are willingly and voluntarily offering supplies to India. As you said, it is a measure of the goodwill. Many of the countries have said that they are coming forward because when they were in need, when they wanted help and support and assistance, India was for them. So today, they also want to come in and support India when it is in such a difficult situation. President Joe Biden, when he was addressing the press, he said in the initial period of the pandemic, India came to our assistance, and now we are here for India.
Mr. Sajjanar, building on what we have seen is the reaction from the United States, and we saw that the first contingent arrived today, the US aid arrived today, and this has also followed President Joe Biden's telephonic conversation with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on April 26th, and the US assistance is likely to include emergency medical care units, oxygen-related supplies, vaccine-related supplies, and other therapeutics as needed. There has been a slight criticism that the US response was maybe a little hesitant. Would you give that analysis much thought, or would you say that things have actually flown pretty smoothly and the US has stood by India as a partner?
I think I would agree with a little with the assessment that was made, that maybe there was a small blip, there was a small stumble. What India would have expected that the United States would have come more readily and more actively to the support of India, both in terms of the equipment, the supplies, but also in terms of words of sympathy and support. So at the initial stages, this was not forthcoming. In fact, just about 10 days ago, on the 16th of April, there was an SOS that had been sent by the chairman of the Serum Institute of India, Adar Poonawala, and that was addressed to the President of the United States, wherein he had said that we are in urgent needs of some raw materials and inputs for manufacture of both the Covishield, which is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, and also Covovax, which Serum Institute would be manufacturing for Novavax, which has been manufactured, which has been created in the United States. So they need some raw materials, and those raw materials had not been forthcoming from the United States. So there was a little bit of a delay, but I don't think that it was an intentional delay. And once the United States realized it, they pulled out all the stops. There was no holds barred, and we had words of support coming in, starting right from President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, he spoke to his counterpart, Mr. Ajit Doval, and the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. All of them came out very, very strongly and said that we are going to assist and help and support India in every possible way. And that led also to the telephonic conversation between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, where it was mentioned that all support that is possible, then that the United States will be extending to India. And as you said, Simran, it includes oxygen generators, because oxygen is one item that has been in very short supply in India. So whether it is oxygen generators, oxygen concentrators, liquid oxygen, the oxygen cylinders, so all these will be coming. There are 2 plane loads that have already landed. A third plane load is coming. There is about 100 million worth of medical equipment are being sent by the United States. In addition to that, what the United States has also mentioned is that it has the supplies of about 60 to 65 million AstraZeneca vaccines, which it is not going to use because it is in its own vaccination drive, it is using the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. So these are vaccines that the United States will be supplying to other countries. It will be to Mexico, to Brazil, to Canada, and to India. So India would also be able to get a significant chunk of these vaccines which are lying in the inventory in the United States. In addition to that, India would also be able to get the raw materials and inputs that Serum Institute of India had been asking for. In fact, those items had been put under some sort of a restriction, if not exactly a ban, by America under the Defense Production Act. The president had invoked the DPA, which is a wartime legislation which was enacted in the early 1950s during the Korean War, and which said that some of these items which are used by the American industry, by the US industry for its own use and production for the people of America, they would have the first right. So the requirement and the demands by the Serum Institute, they were not being fulfilled. So the decision has been taken by President Biden that these raw materials and inputs would also be provided so that the production of both AstraZeneca vaccine as well as Covovax, which India would be using in due course, that they could be ramped up and they could meet the requirements, again, not only of people in India, but people all over the world. You would recall that India started its own vaccination drive on the 16th of January, but then it started providing vaccines to the whole world, and it has provided supply to more than 80 countries, more than 60 million vaccines. So India's vaccination drive under the Maitri Vaccine Initiative is not only for use by Indian citizens, but as the Prime Minister mentioned some time ago, it is being used for the whole humanity and for whole mankind.
Pastor Sajanhar, as you mentioned about vaccine Maitri, and we saw how India had reached out globally, whether it was sending the vaccine, and at a point when the world faced a shortage of hydroxychloroquine, that time also India had reached out, and we see that the world is reciprocating today. We see that France is sending India help, as is Germany, the United Kingdom. So we see a lot of help from Europe also, and the fact that Europe itself is also struggling quite, it's a difficult phase for them. Their corona cases are also on the rise. So in the middle of all this, as we see Europe itself struggling with the crisis, it is also taking this effort out to help India. How do you think this reflects on India's stature globally and the ties that India has built with various nations, that in times of crisis, when we see UK, Germany, France dealing with their own crisis, Japan is going through hard time with the corona crisis, but despite their own domestic problems, they are standing with India, they are sending supplies to India, and it seems like international cooperation is the real fundamental going behind all this today.
This signals, and this is a testimony to the high respect and prestige that India has garnered over the years. This is a testimony to the goodwill that India has over the last, of course, many years, but particularly over the last 7 years, because we have seen the very proactive and the bold and the energetic foreign policy that Prime Minister Modi has pursued over these years, in terms of cementing ties, in terms of cementing relations. That is why, as you mentioned very correctly, Simran, that there are these countries, whether it is France, Germany, UK, it is Sweden, it is Japan, all of them are having their own lockdowns. All of them are having challenges to meet as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. But that notwithstanding, they are making sure that they supply to India, they send supplies to India. What is very urgently required here to deal with our once-in-a-century crisis, totally unanticipated, totally unexpected. And that is why what is of greatest urgency in India, all of them are flowing to India. And I think it's a matter of great satisfaction that all these countries, to the extent possible, they are doing, and it is reflective of the goodwill that India has been able to garner and the very strong ties of friendship, cooperation and participation that India has got.
Mr. Sajanhar, we also saw that in the Quad meetings, that is the meeting between the US, India, Japan, Australia, the discussions for ramping up production in India for the corona vaccine were discussed, and it was decided that, India would step up its production capacities. How do you assess the success or the role that Quad has played as India counters the wave home? And going forward, how much can one expect from the Quad countries coming together in times of crisis like what we are facing today?
I think this is really a testing time as far as the Quad is concerned. Of course, in this context, the Quad is not acting and working together as one unit. That will happen, I think, going forward. Here, the Quad individual countries, like we've spoken about, how the United States is supplying about more than $100 million worth of goods and equipment to India. Japan is making its own contribution. Australia has also sent the first tranche of its support. So they are acting individually. But you are right when you say that on the 12th of March, when the Quad Summit meeting took place, then it was decided that technology would be provided by the United States and Japan. Also, funding would be provided by both these countries to India to ramp up its production so that we would be able to produce 1 billion doses of the vaccine by 2022. And this would be provided to countries in the Indo-Pacific, particularly as far as the ASEAN countries are concerned. So I think going forward, this has huge potential. I think this collaboration between the 4 Quad countries is going to be very seminal.
Ambassador Sajanhar, another country that has really stepped up has been Russia. And we've already seen that 2 Russian flights with oxygen concentrators, lung ventilation equipment has arrived. And the Russian ambassador to India also tweeted that the Russian Federation decided to send humanitarian assistance to India in the spirit of the special and privileged strategic partnership between our two countries as well as in the context of our anti-COVID-19 cooperation. How much does this strengthen the very age-old relationship between India and Russia?
So this is again testimony to the time-tested partnership. It is Russia is a key pillar of India's foreign policy, and this has been demonstrated once again. In fact, Russia was the first country to offer its assistance and support. And notwithstanding the changes that are taking place on the global geopolitical scene, Russia has come forward to support India. And this was again reflected by the very warm, cordial and useful conversation that Prime Minister Modi had with President Putin just day before yesterday. First of all, to thank him for all the support that Russia is extending. And also, it was decided at that time that the relationship would be elevated to the 2+2 level, which means that the foreign minister and the defense minister of both countries would be meeting each other. So this reflects that Russia is the only non-Quad country to have such a 2+2 partnership with India. This signifies that Russia is a very significant player as far as India's foreign policy is concerned.
And in the coming days, we will continue to follow the developments in international cooperation as countries stand together to fight this pandemic. With these thoughts, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.